Hey, Sean Chandler here. I'm trying out some new stuff with video transitions. I don't know if it's working quite right, but we are in the fourth part of our four-part series talking about the DC week on the CW. It's kind of a three-part crossover with a little episode cameo in this episode of Supergirl at the beginning of this week. Overall, this has been a lot of fun. I've got a lot of crazy discussion in the comment section on my videos, as apparently people have strong opinions on these shows, as I do, and I'm glad that you do as well. To give you a recap, if you haven't seen the previous ones, the episode of Supergirl on Monday, I was not crazy about it. I thought it was kind of a mess. The plot lines didn't come together. There's too many of them, and there's too much of a focus on the romance, considering all the other stuff going on. The episode of The Flash, I thought was really good. No particular issues with it that were big. I mean, there was I can nitpick anything. Arrow yesterday, I thought it was a good episode of Arrow. It was not a great crossover episode. When you think crossover episode, you're not thinking about the characters are in a dream state and they are dreaming about meeting each other at a party and shaking hands. That's not what you have in mind. You're thinking about them doing stuff together, them interacting, them actually talking to each other, actually having an adventure, and they set that up with this alien invasion, but then that middle part in the Arrow episode was very much an Arrow episode that was tied in via the plot device of the crossover, as opposed to a great crossover episode. So in the comment section, some people debated whether that was fair or not. A synopsis of what it was, I would say it is a solid episode of Arrow, not a solid crossover. With all that said, we come to the finale today in Legends of Tomorrow, the fourth part of this four-night event, third part of the actual crossover. So how was it? Well, I thought it was pretty good. For an episode of Legends of Tomorrow, it's probably the best episode of Legends of Tomorrow, because that show is kind of wildly uneven, hasn't quite found its footing yet. I'm not caught up on this season yet. There's a few episodes I missed in the last few. I've seen the first few episodes. But overall, it's kind of a show that's figuring out what it looks like, and it's struggling because it's part of these other shows. So there's time travel rules that they're kind of bound by that create issues for their show, even though rules are introduced on The Flash. And, with all that said, so this was very enjoyable for an episode of Legends of Tomorrow. How was it as a crossover episode? It was a decent enough, it was satisfying enough conclusion to what they've set up for what they could do with the constraints of being a TV show with all these shows coming together. It was good enough. So let's dig into that. So as for the good things, I really liked that they had this plot line where they set up very early on that they'd showed up before, and so on Legends of Tomorrow they went back in time to be able to interact with earlier versions of. I thought that worked nicely. Likewise, to be able to have kind of like this 1950s war scene with aliens in it, that was a lot of fun to see. Just kind of like this retro throwback type deal going on. I really enjoyed that. I liked that there was like these Men in Black type characters showing up that are working with the aliens. I loved the X-Files. I loved the first Men in Black movie. So anytime there's that government conspiracy type stuff going on, always a big fan of that. This episode had some of the best character moments of people interacting with each other. Like that last scene just where Barry and Oliver are going out for a drink and they're just talking about life. That's kind of the stuff I would have liked to have seen more of throughout this whole deal. Some people have indicated that maybe I just wanted a big, gigantic CGI fest for the crossover. That's not what I wanted. I want the right amount of that. But, I mean, it's a TV show. It's not going to have a great CGI finale. But yeah, I mean, those character moments and having Jack Bristow from Alias, like him reflecting on having a daughter because of the changes in the timeline, like that's really neat. Like that's the stuff that I really like to see on these shows. Well, nicely handled character moments where it doesn't feel just forced, where it doesn't feel out of place, and where people are really dealing with the consequences of this larger than life adventure that they're a part of. So I thought that worked really nicely. There's a great joke referencing the fact that Brandon Routh played Superman before, and it was just like this little line they throw in there and then pause for a second. I literally laughed out loud at it. I thought it was really funny. So a lot of things in this episode that I thought were really quite nice. Anything I missed about it? Oh, I liked that they had different responses contrasting Diggle's response to learning that he had a daughter that disappeared versus the Jack Bristow's response of like, what? I don't want a daughter. I'm going to change it back. And just has no, like, he views this as like a fake reality where Diggle's like something he never even knew, and he feels loss over it. So this contrasting understandings of the word, like their perspective on things, and likewise having a moment where Cisco does the thing that he's so mad at Barry about. And so having that contrast to it that's kind of has a fair and good bookend to a plot line, that Cisco had good reason to be very angry because he'd never been in the position. As soon as he's in the position, he goes, oh, I get it. I understand why you did what you did. And so it's nice to see the change of perspective in them. With all that said, we got a lot of problems here. The first one, the one that just blaring problem that I think's been the problem throughout really this season of The Flash with Flashpoint, the rules they've established and kind of like the way the show just wants to beat up Barry over Flashpoint, is that maybe I'm missing something. Tell me in the comments section. If you need to, tell me below if fact check me on this. Explain to me, why is it that Barry's actions are so much worse than everyone else's? Why is it that there's a whole TV show about guys changing time? In the episode, they change time. We've got a guy changing time and has a daughter out of it. Time travel keeps happening throughout this whole deal. But for some reason, Barry's the only one it's like this big, gigantic issue. Why is that? If you can tell me, I would greatly appreciate it, because it just seems like a problem that is plaguing these shows where there's time travel, galaxy jumping all around, but there's this one action by Barry that's the one that's really bad. Other people are jumping through time, whole TV show about jumping through time, but Barry is the only person that really messed things up. And this is a problem because it's so central to the plotline of this episode, central to the plotline to the season of The Flash that we're watching, and it's central to the premise of the show, Legends of Tomorrow. And so when the rules are just broken and wrong, we have a problem. Beyond that, the big finale, I wasn't really expecting it to be gigantic spectacle of movie level. It was odd to me, though, that they put it on the top of the building. And that feels like maybe budget constraints, or somehow they're able to film better on top of buildings, or they're shooting that. I don't know what it is, but they end up on the top of buildings on these shows all the time. And it's kind of funny, but it doesn't, when you're on top of a building saving the world in a big, gigantic battle, it makes it feel smaller scale than it actually is. And I think that's kind of a problem for, trying to do this big finale. Even putting it in an open field or something like that kind of gives it a bigger scale to it, bigger scope, building, small. And so that's a small complaint, though. I mean, they did a lot of things to make it seem big. There's people all over the planet. We got Supergirl running all over the place. So a lot of really good things here. A lot of things where it doesn't quite come together. It wasn't as tight and focused of an episode as the Flash's episode was. But at the same time, it was much more on point and better crossover episode than the Arrow episode was. As I don't even know how you could compare the episode. My favorite of the whole bunch is certainly the Flash episode. It had a lot of things in it. I could have dealt with that episode being twice as long. You could have stretched that plot. There's plenty of plot in there to stretch over 2 episodes. The Arrow episode, not a bad Arrow episode, but as part of this crossover, and it felt like 10 minutes worth of crossover episodes stretched over 40 minutes because we put 30 minutes of just Arrow in it. Whereas most of these other ones felt much more balanced as crossover episodes that were part of the show itself. Overall, if we're going to rate this whole crossover experience that they did, I'm going to say that it was a good effort. It was something that and preface all of this with, I can't preface it now because I've already said it was good, but to start talking, preface this, it's incredible that we live in a day and age, a time when we can have 4 of these shows that can do a crossover together, and that is not lost on me at all. But the great thing about living in a world where you got 4 of these shows where they can cross over together is that we can talk about it and disagree and have different opinions on what that will look like what we thought about it, and how much crossover should be in it, how much of each individual show should be in it. It's awesome that we live in that day and age. with all that said, I was not as satisfied as I wanted with it. And some of that has to do with just the limitations of what they were trying to do. Some of that has to do with they're figuring out how to blend all these shows together. And some of that is because I think they got themselves in a little bit of trouble that the 100th episode of Arrow, which I didn't know, thank you guys for fact-checking me in the comment section yesterday, fell during this week, so they felt that they had to work that into this crossover plot line, in which case the crossover was kind of weird because it was very much strong crossover setup, strong crossover finale, and then episode that kind of felt like a, tangent to what was going on. In which case, plot lines in the first part and the second part seemed really rushed. The plot line in the middle piece seemed stretched out as per the crossover. And so that was kind of frustrating in it. And I think they just might have been better served to find a way to not try and cater to each one of the shows as much and focus on what this event was really about. And this event was about the crossover. That's what you promoted at. That's what they pumped it all about. And you have to make choices by how much you go for each show and how much you go for just having a great crossover and creating a unique thing in and of itself. And they went very much for individual show. And so when you get to the Flash episode, his cast of other characters are very prominent. You get to Arrow, and then it's the Arrow tribute show for the 100th episode. And you get to Legends of Tomorrow. We're traveling through time. We're on a spaceship, and more characters appear. And maybe this could have been a really great thing. And this goes back to something I mentioned yesterday about how I think that maybe a better way to do this would be to do an annual made-for-TV movie that's of these 4 shows coming together. So you don't have to try and make it about any one of these shows. You don't have 3 parts or 4 parts chopped up trying to cater to 4 different audiences and have the show be true to the show. But you don't have to do all of that. And you don't have to try and fit it into these, stop pushing pause on the stories they're telling to tell this other story. If you make a movie and the movie comes out during the summertime, it comes out at some point in time, just work it out so it's a separate entity that you, like this alien invasion story, works great as a crossover episode. It makes sense as to all of these different pieces, why they would do this, why it would happen. And so it could have been better than it was with the story they were telling, with the characters they had to work with some of the trust type things that they worked into throughout it that made sense as actual interrelational struggles, whether that's Flash creating Flashpoint, and that should make people mad, whether that's built-in prejudices. People have those, so it's not surprising that people behave that way. Work that all into a 90-minute, a 2-hour-long made-for-TV movie of these shows coming together. You could have more of what you want out of the crossover, which is them working together, which is them having little character moments. And when you make it on each one of the individual shows, you have to bring in the full cast of those shows that don't necessarily make sense in the crossover. And so then that waters down the crossover element of it. This way you preserve all of it, and you can do it a little bit better because you don't have to push pause on the shows. You don't have to work in all these characters in the crossover that don't really need to be in the crossover. And you can just focus on making one great standalone thing that brings all these elements together. I think that would be awesome. Once again, so we're clear about all of this. I think it's awesome that we live in a day and age where we can have a show like this or have a crossover like this where all of these shows, it's amazing we have any of these shows. So when I was growing up, they had the Flash TV show that ran for 1 season, and there wasn't a whole lot they could do with the special effects, and so they were very limited in what the Flash could do, and then that kind of ran into problems for the show, and it got canceled after 1 season. Some of it was great, and a lot of it wasn't all that great. And then you jump forward, and there's some other TV shows that were live action. We got Smallville in the Zeros, but they were very limited in somewhat even the effects they could do there. Nowadays, we live in a time where they can do incredible things. There have been some fight scenes on Arrow which are much better than fight scenes in movies. That's not uncommon for the show Arrow. That's awesome that we live in a day and age like that. The effects that they can pull off on Legends of Tomorrow, Flash, Supergirl are so impressive for being on TV that they can do incredible things. And that's awesome that this is the day and age we live in, and there's even more they can do, where you can have Superman show up in another crossover if they decide to do that. And that's amazing. With all that said, just because the potential is here, because it could be awesome, because there's awesome things in here, doesn't mean it was as good as I think it could have been. And there's some things that they could have done to improve all of this. Now, if anyone's watching this, because it looks like the feed's been a little bit choppy, perhaps some of you are going to disagree with me, and I am ready for it. I want to have a lively discussion. I think I've actually got some footage, I don't know if this will work, of the discussion we had in the comments section before, of what that looked like a little bit. Hopefully this... So that was a little... I've had a lot of sugar today. So it was quite lively in the comment section of almost all the videos I've done this week. Lots of people chiming in, lots of people joining in. And I want you to disagree with me. It's actually not as much fun to talk about things when we're all on the same page, because I'm like, yeah, I guess I agree with that. I like to have some discussion, some liveliness, some disagreement, because some of my thoughts are stupid. They're quite dumb. I actually am quite misinformed about a lot of things. I did not remember that this was the 100th episode of Arrow yesterday. I didn't remember that. There's a lot of things I forget about. I've forgotten a lot of people's names. That makes this fun to be able to talk about it. I come into these, I'm just the casual guy. I can't track all the news anymore. I just watch these episodes week to week, try and keep up with them, and sometimes I have intelligent opinions. Sometimes I have really dumb opinions. And so I want to talk with you about it anyway. Thank you guys so much for watching this. If you're watching this, or all week long, if you've joined in on the discussion, it means the world to me. And if you're new to this channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I don't always go live. When I go live, I get rambly and do weirder and stranger things than I normally do. Have less focused stuff, but I get to, it's a little bit more of my personality that comes out. Please consider clicking that subscribe button. The video quality also goes up, and the audio quality when I'm not live. But thank you guys so much. Let's have some discussion. What did you guys think about this crossover? What do you think they could have done to do it better? That's really the question I want to know. What do you think on how they could do this crossover better? As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'm going to get ready for more fighting in the comment section with one final clip.